The hardest part of a lie isn't the person telling it. It's the dozens of people who watch you swallow it every single day smiling to your face while they count down the seconds until you finally break. It is that heavy, suffocating silence in a room right after you walk in, the way the laughter dies down just a little too fast, and the sudden interest everyone takes in the floor or their drinks. You stand there thinking you are surrounded by friends, neighbors, and coworkers who have your back, while in reality you are just the unpaid entertainment in a theater where everyone else already bought a ticket to your downfall. Before we dig into exactly how the walls started crumbling down around my life in this quiet town, I want you to take a second, drop a comment right now, and let me know which city or state you are listening from today. It helps me know who is sitting out there with me in the dark and if you have ever felt like the only person left out of a secret. Make sure to hit that subscribe button because you are definitely not alone in this world. For 12 long years, I convinced myself that the burning in my chest was just the price an ordinary man pays to build something that lasts. I am a chief operator at a regional industrial water treatment facility, a place built of rusted iron screaming steam valves and concrete floors that never quite lose the chill of the earth beneath them. My daily reality is defined by the grinding repetition of the 4 p.m. to 4 a.m. swing shift, a grueling schedule that means I watch the sun go down through grease-stained factory windows and drive home when the rest of the world is trapped in their deepest sleep. It is hard, unforgiving labor, the kind that leaves your skin smelling of sulfur and industrial soap, no matter how long you stand under the hot water at the end of the night. My hands are permanently calloused, the skin around my knuckles stained with grease that won't come out with ordinary soap, and my lower back aches with a dull, constant throb every time the winter temperature drops below freezing. But I never complained, not once, because every hour of overtime I pulled on those long, freezing nights was a brick laid for the future of the woman I loved more than my own life. Kira was everything I wasn't. While I was a creature of grease and heavy steel boots, she was a polished, radiant presence who could light up any room she walked into. She worked as a high-profile medical device sales representative, a career that required her to be effortlessly charming, flawlessly dressed, and deeply embedded in the local upscale social circles. She spent her days navigating corporate boardrooms, private medical clinics, and the exclusive luncheons at the local country club, rubbing shoulders with the city's most prominent professionals. When she married me, everyone in our small town whispered that she had managed to settle for a safe, reliable anchor, a man who would provide a solid foundation while she reached for the stars. I took immense pride in that role. I bought her the custom-built suburban home she always talked about, with the wraparound porch and the manicured lawn that sat perfectly under the mature oak trees. I made sure her driveway held a brand-new luxury SUV every 3 years, ensuring she looked the part of a highly successful professional whenever she drove out to meet her high-end clients. I took the grueling night shifts, the double turnarounds on holiday weekends, and the exhausting winter maintenance schedules so she would never have to worry about a single mortgage payment or an unpaid bill. I thought we were a team working toward the same American dream, balancing each other out with my quiet labor and her brilliant light. But a house doesn't turn cold all at once. It happens in micro-movements like frost, slowly creeping across a window pane until you can no longer see the world outside. The first real shift began about 3 years ago, a subtle, almost imperceptible change in the rhythm of our daily lives that I brushed off as the natural exhaustion of two career-driven adults. Kira's corporate schedule suddenly expanded, filling up with what she called high-priority hospitality dinners and interstate regional alignment seminars. Her phone, which used to sit carelessly on the kitchen island while she cooked or talked to her mother, became an extension of her right hand. It was suddenly locked with a new complex passcode she claimed was mandated by her company's strict new compliance and patient data privacy laws. Whenever she laid it down on a surface, the screen was always turned face down, a flat black piece of glass hiding whatever was happening underneath. I remember coming home from a particularly brutal 14-hour shift in the dead of January, my boots caked with frozen mud, my shoulders stiff from repairing a ruptured main line in the sub-zero wind. The house was completely dark, save for the single amber light above the stove. Kira was upstairs, her bedroom door shut tight, a barrier that had recently become a permanent fixture on the nights I arrived home late. When I walked into our bathroom to wash the grime from my face, the faint, unmistakable scent of an unfamiliar, expensive sandalwood cologne hung heavy in the air, mixing with the scent of her lavender bath oils. When I asked her about it the next morning over coffee, She didn't even look up from her tablet, merely letting out a soft, dismissive laugh that felt colder than the wind outside. She told me I was breathing in too many industrial fumes at the plant, that it was just a premium sample of a new disinfectant spray her company was piloting in executive clinics, and that I should focus on my own demanding schedule instead of overanalyzing her workspace. I believed her because that is what you do when you love someone with a devotion that blinds your own common sense. You make up excuses for them before they even have to lie to your face. I told myself that she was under immense pressure, that managing multi-million-dollar medical contracts required a level of social dedication I could never understand with my simple background. I ignored the way she began to pull away when I reached for her hand on our rare shared Sunday afternoons, her fingers going limp before she smoothly found a reason to get up and check her planner. I ignored the way she looked at my calloused hands when we sat down for dinner, a brief, flickering glance of profound distaste that she would quickly cover with a practiced, superficial smile. She started suggesting that I shouldn't bother coming to her corporate charity galas or the country club fundraisers, claiming that the technical jargon and the high society small talk would only bore me after a long week at the treatment plant. She said she was protecting my peace, ensuring I didn't have to waste my hard-earned days off pretending to care about local politics, while, in reality, she was quietly erasing my presence from every single corner of her public life. The distance between us grew from a few inches into an impassable chasm, but she never looked angry or resentful. She just looked completely detached, as if I were a piece of furniture she had inherited from a previous life and hadn't found the time to throw away yet. She began taking frequent weekend business trips to the state capitol, leaving on Friday afternoons with a neatly packed designer suitcase and returning late Sunday evening with an air of energized indifference. Every time I tried to ask about her weekend, she would offer a brief, highly technical summary of market projections and medical equipment compliance using a wall of professional vocabulary to ensure I wouldn't ask any follow-up questions. Our home became a well-oiled machine run by a stranger, where my only function was to provide the steady financial stream that kept the lights on the lawn green and her social standing pristine. I spent those long, quiet hours on the midnight shifts surrounded by the rhythmic mechanical hum of the massive water pumps, watching the black water churn through the filtration tanks and wondering when exactly I had lost the ability to make my own wife smile. I would sit in the operator's booth with a lukewarm thermos of black coffee, staring at the security monitors while my mind replayed every interaction we had over the past week, looking for the exact moment the alignment had broken. I kept telling myself that once the current project at the plant was completed, once the winter gave way to spring, I would take 2 weeks of accrued vacation time, buy 2 tickets to the coast, and find a way to bring her back to me. I clung to that hope like a man holding onto a frayed rope over a cliff, completely unaware that the rope had already been cut miles above his head, and that the ground beneath his feet was nothing but an illusion built by a town that was quietly laughing at his expense. The winter began to lose its grip on the valley, turning the snow into gray slush that ran down the curbs into the storm drains, but the air inside our house remained permanently frozen. Kira's interactions with me had dwindled down to a series of polite functional texts regarding utility bills, grocery lists, and the schedule for the lawn care service. She was physically present in the house during the early mornings, moving through the kitchen like a ghost wrapped in silk. Her mind clearly miles away while she answered emails on her phone with rapid, aggressive kiskis. She stopped asking about my shifts. She stopped mentioning our upcoming anniversary, and she looked right through me whenever I spoke. Her eyes focused on some point on the wall just behind my left shoulder. One Thursday morning in late March, after a grueling double shift where a frozen valve had flooded the primary intake gallery, I pulled my old Ford truck into the driveway around 5:30 a.m. The sky was a pale, bruised purple, the first light of dawn barely catching the tops of the bare oak trees. The house was quiet, the windows dark, the entire neighborhood locked in that deep pre-dawn stillness where even the birds haven't started to move. I turned off the engine, the sudden silence of the cab pressing against my eardrums after 12 hours of industrial noise, and sat there for a moment waiting for the stiffness in my legs to ease before I dragged my tool bag out of the truck bed. I reached across the passenger seat to grab my heavy canvas jacket, my hand brushing against the cold leather, and as I pulled it toward me, my eyes naturally drifted toward the front porch of our home, tracking the familiar lines of the house I had spent a decade paying for with the literal sweat of my brow. I stepped down from the high cab of the truck, my boots making a sharp, heavy crunch against the gravel at the edge of the asphalt. The freezing morning air immediately biting into the back of my neck, where the collar of my uniform was damp with sweat. I walked toward the back of the truck to secure the tailgate latch. My movement slow, and practiced the heavy metal clinking softly in the dawn air while my eyes caught a strange, rhythmic glint of light reflecting off the chrome of the luxury SUV parked in the driveway just ahead of me. The metallic pop of the latch settling into place felt unnaturally loud, echoing through the empty driveway as the first real rays of daylight hit the driver's side window of her vehicle. Instead of heading inside to strip off my heavy uniform, my eyes locked onto the passenger seat of her SUV, where a small silver object was emitting a dull, persistent blue glow against the dark leather interior. I walked over the wet gravel shifting beneath my soles and leaned closer to the glass to find a secondary smartphone slipping out of a zipped compartment of her gym bag, its screen repeatedly lighting up with incoming preview notifications. It didn't take a genius to realize that a woman with a corporate-issued device has absolutely no practical reason to carry an unlisted prepaid burner phone hidden away beneath extra layers of clothing. I reached inside my pocket, pulled out the spare key fob I always kept on my heavy ring, and pressed the unlock button, the vehicle's lights flashing once in the damp morning air to signal that the perimeter defense had dropped. Sliding my calloused hand into the bag, my fingers brushed past the smooth fabric of her running gear until they closed around the cold, cheap plastic casing of the vibrating device. There was no biometric lock on this one, just a simple swipe screen that she had left completely open, likely believing that my predictable routine meant I would already be fast asleep upstairs under the covers. The interface opened directly to an encrypted messaging thread that stretched back through multiple seasons, a relentless chronicle of locations, times, and degrading commentary that instantly turned the blood in my veins to liquid nitrogen. The messages weren't just standard professions of affection. They were a highly detailed, logistical record of a parallel life that had been playing out inside my own home while I was pulling mandatory double shifts to cover our premium insurance premiums. Every single weekend trip she had taken to the state capital wasn't for medical compliance seminars. It was spent in luxury downtown hotel suites booked under a corporate account belonging to Vaughn. Seeing his name printed out in black and white on that cheap screen felt like a physical blow to the sternum, considering he was the senior architect who had just been selected to redesign the municipal library and country club pavilion. He was a man who frequently shook my hand at local community planning meetings, offering a patronizing pat on the back while praising my essential dedication to keeping the town's infrastructure running smoothly. But the physical betrayal, as sickening as it was, didn't compare to the sheer psychological cruelty laced through their casual conversations. Kira had shared photographs of our living room, our kitchen, and even the small wooden shelf I had spent 3 weekends carving for her birthday, using them as backdrops to joke about how completely oblivious I was. They referred to me as the Night Watchman, laughing at the fact that my exhausting 4 p.m. to 4 a.m. schedule essentially gave them a free, fully furnished estate to use whenever they pleased, complete with a manicured lawn and a stocked refrigerator. She had explicitly told Vaughn that my mind was too slow, too worn down by industrial noise and mechanical blueprints to ever notice the subtle shifts in her routine. I stood there beside her vehicle, the screen casting a pale light over my grease-stained knuckles, realizing that the woman I had spent 12 years protecting viewed my entire existence as nothing more than a convenient, unpaid security guard for her playground. I carefully slipped the device back into the hidden pocket of her bag, zipped it shut precisely to the millimeter, and locked the vehicle before walking toward our front door with the steady, unhurried gait of a man who had just watched his entire world vanish into a sinkhole. The wood of the kitchen table felt freezing when I sat down in the dark, my mind operating with a terrifying mechanical clarity that I usually reserved for high-pressure system failures at the treatment plant. I didn't storm upstairs, I didn't drag her out of bed by her hair, and I didn't scream until my lungs burned because I realized with absolute certainty that a loud confrontation would only give her the upper hand. In our state, a messy emotional divorce filled with wild accusations would simply allow her to hire a high-priced suburban attorney, play the role of the neglected wife of a distant blue-collar worker, and walk away with half of my retirement fund and the house I built. The real horror began to sink in later that afternoon, when I finally went down to the local diner on Main Street to grab a quick bite before my next shift, my eyes hyper-aware of every single interaction around me. I watched the way Sylvan, the mechanic who worked at the auto shop just 3 blocks from our house, suddenly stopped talking to the guy next to him the moment my work truck pulled into the gravel lot. When I walked up to the counter to order a black coffee, the older woman behind the register wouldn't look me in the eye, her hands shaking slightly as she handed me my change with a soft, pitying sigh that made the hair on my arm stand up. It was a subtle, pervasive shift in the atmosphere, a collective holding of breath from people I had known since high school, all of them suddenly treating me like a man walking around with a terminal diagnosis that no one had the courage to mention out loud. I sat in the corner booth staring into the dark reflection of my coffee as the pieces of the puzzle began to slide into place with sickening accuracy. They hadn't stayed silent because they didn't know. They stayed silent because small-town dynamics dictate that you never interfere with a wealthy developer who holds the contracts for half the commercial real estate in the county. Sylvan had undoubtedly seen Vaughn's expensive sports car parked behind the thick oak trees near my driveway during my long winter night shifts while he was driving home from his late towing runs. The neighbors had watched her walk out to that car in her silk robes while my truck was parked 5 miles away in the industrial sector, treating the open degradation of my marriage as a piece of local gossip to be discussed over backyard fences and Sunday barbecues. As I sat there, the hum of the diner's old refrigerator seemed to grow louder, vibrating through the formica table and into my bones. I remembered the block party last summer, how Vaughn had stood by my grill holding a cold beer and asking me about the water filtration upgrades at the plant while Kira stood just 10 feet away laughing with a group of neighborhood wives. I remembered the subtle knowing glances that passed between those women when Kira excused herself to go inside and get more ice. I had thought it was just small-town friendliness, the easy camaraderie of people who lived on the same tree-lined street. Now, through the lens of that glowing silver phone, I saw it for what it truly was, a coordinated malicious theater where my labor paid for the stage and my ignorance provided the entertainment. The level of planning required to keep a secret that large for that long meant that my entire life had been unspooled without my knowledge. Kira hadn't just stepped across a line. She had built an entire ecosystem on the other side of it, using our shared name and my hard-earned resources to fund her residency there. She had used our joint credit card to buy expensive outfits for her conferences, which were actually weekend trysts at the lakeside resort 2 counties over. She had invited Vaughn into our home, into the space I spent my weekends maintaining, allowing him to sit on the furniture I paid for, while they drafted messages mocking the smell of grease and industrial soap that lingered on my skin. The sheer weight of the humiliation threatened to crush my chest, a physical pressure that made it hard to draw a full breath in the cramped diner booth. I looked down at my hands, the knuckles dark with embedded engine grease that no amount of scrubbing could entirely remove, and for the first time in my life I felt a deep, profound sense of alienation from my own body. These hands had built her dream, had cleared the snow from her path every winter morning, and had worked through the night so she could walk through the world with her head held high. And yet to her, and the man she chose, these hands were just a sign of inferiority, proof that I belonged in the dark, noisy corners of the town, while they enjoyed the bright, clean spaces. The realization didn't make me want to smash the coffee cup or confront the silent onlookers in the diner. It filled me with a quiet, icy resolve that settled behind my eyes like a physical weight. I paid for my untouched coffee and walked out into the bright afternoon sun, the light reflecting harshly off the polished hoods of the trucks lined up in the gravel lot. I drove back toward the industrial sector, my truck moving through the familiar grid of streets that now felt entirely foreign, as if the town itself had shifted its skin overnight. Every house I passed, every familiar storefront on Main Street, now looked like a spectator box in a stadium where I had been forced to play the fool without my consent. I knew that if I broke down now, if I let the anger dictate my next move, the narrative would be written by them. I would become the bitter, unstable husband who couldn't keep up with his successful wife, giving them the perfect justification to cast me aside and keep everything we had built. When I arrived at the plant for my shift, the heavy iron gates and the roaring steam valves felt like a sanctuary, a place where the laws of physics still applied and mechanical systems operated without malice. I spent the first 3 hours of my shift walking the catwalks, checking the pressure gauges, and watching the dark, untreated water churn through the primary filtration galleries. The mechanical rhythm helped clear the fog from my brain, replacing the emotional static with a cold, systematic focus that allowed me to chart a path forward. I realized that a woman like Kira, who based her entire identity on social prestige and the envy of her peers, wouldn't be destroyed by a quick, messy public scene. She would only be truly broken if she were forced to watch her carefully constructed world disappear piece by piece so slowly that she wouldn't even realize she was sinking until the mud reached her chin. I sat in the operator's booth during the midnight lull, the green glow of the security monitors illuminating the desk where I had placed a yellow legal pad I found in the supply closet. I began to list our shared assets, our bank accounts, the equity in the house, and the corporate credit lines that Kira managed for her styling business. I noted every discrepancy I could remember from the past 2 years, every sudden business expense that didn't align with her clinic schedules, and every cash withdrawal that had seemed insignificant at the time. I was mapping out the infrastructure of her betrayal, locating the exact stress points in her financial and social life where a small, precise pressure could cause a total structural failure. I knew that the community's silence was entirely dependent on Vaughn's status and his ability to hand out lucrative subcontracts to local businesses like Sylvan's shop. The moment that status was compromised, the moment the wealthy developer became a liability rather than an asset, the town's loyalty would shift like sand in a riverbed. They hadn't stayed silent out of affection for Kira or respect for her affair. They had stayed silent out of fear and self-interest, and I could use that exact same self-interest to dismantle her safety net from the inside out. I wrote down names, dates, and connections, my pen moving across the yellow paper with the same steady, deliberate stroke I used when drawing up maintenance schedules for the high-pressure main lines. By the time the sun began to rise over the cooling towers, casting a cold gray light across the industrial park, my plan was no longer a vague desire for vengeance. It was a blueprint, an engineering document designed to take down a structure that had been rotting from the foundation up. I carefully folded the yellow paper, slid it into the inside pocket of my heavy canvas work jacket, and stood up to check the final filtration readings before my shift ended. My body was exhausted, my muscles aching from the long hours on the concrete floor, but my mind was entirely detached from the physical fatigue, locked into a state of hypervigilant calm that I had never experienced before. I drove home through the early morning fog, the streets empty and silent, the quiet suburbs looking like a model village waiting for someone to set it in motion. When I pulled into our driveway, her luxury SUV was parked in its usual spot, its polished black surface catching the first pale light of the dawn. The house was still dark, the wraparound porch looking pristine and inviting under the shadow of the large oak trees, a perfect picture of suburban success that had been bought with a decade of midnight shifts and calloused hands. I turned off the engine, stepped out of the cab, and walked toward the front door, my boots making that same heavy rhythmic crunch against the gravel that had marked my arrival every morning for years. When I walked into our entryway, the house smelled of expensive coffee and her premium lavender soap, the familiar sense of our life together now feeling like a chemical irritant in my throat. Kira was standing in front of the hallway mirror, her back to me as she carefully adjusted the sharp lapels of a new designer blazer she had bought for her upcoming presentation. She caught my reflection in the glass, her eyes narrowing slightly with that familiar, superficial detachment before she offered a brief, dismissive nod without turning around to face me directly. She told me she had an important late-night networking mixer with the county development board and that I shouldn't wait up for her. Her voice smooth and completely devoid of hesitation as she reached for her car keys. I stood by the entryway, my hands buried deep inside the pockets of my grease-stained work jacket, watching her fingers trace the leather edge of her purse with an absolute unshakable confidence in her own immunity. The heavy front door clicked shut behind her, the vibration rattling the decorative glass panels and leaving me alone in the sudden ringing silence of the hallway. I didn't move for a long time, just watching the small dust motes dance in the shaft of morning light where she had been standing seconds before, her expensive French perfume still hanging thick and suffocating in the air. A normal man would have broken down right there, letting the weight of her casual deception crush him onto the hardwood floor. But the blueprint in my jacket pocket felt like a physical shield against the pain. I reached into my coat, my calloused fingers brushing against the crisp edge of the yellow legal pad, and let out a slow, steady breath that cleared the last traces of hesitation from my chest. Playing the role of the oblivious, exhausted blue-collar husband required a level of psychological discipline that tested every boundary of my sanity over the next 3 weeks, every single evening. I sat across the dinner table from Kira, listening to her artificial complaints about corporate logistics and clinic compliance, while knowing exactly whose hands had been on her waist just hours prior. I watched her smile at her phone under the kitchen table, her face lighting up with a genuine warmth she hadn't shown me in half a decade, while I calmly chewed my food and asked her if she needed me to take her SUV in for an oil change. It was like chewing on broken glass just to keep a smile on my face, but I kept my voice flat, my eyes dull, and my posture slumped, feeding her dangerous illusion that I was too beaten down by my grueling night shifts to notice the world collapsing around me. Her supreme arrogance became my greatest asset, blinding her to the invisible net I was quietly weaving around her entire financial existence. Because she believed my mind only operated in terms of water pressure and rusty valves, she grew incredibly sloppy, leaving bank statements on the counter and using our shared home computer to manage her freelance styling consultancy accounts. 2 nights after discovering the burner phone while she was allegedly attending a regional seminar 3 counties away, I sat in our home office with a forensic accountant I had retained from the next city over a man who had no ties to our local country club or Vaughn's commercial development empire. For 5 hours, we went through every digital footprint she had left behind, unearthing a systematic trail of financial betrayal that went far deeper than a simple extramarital affair. Kira had been using her positioning as a co-signer on our family equity lines to quietly funnel tens of thousands of dollars into what she labeled as independent marketing ventures. In reality, these funds were being utilized to subsidize Vaughn's private client appreciation events, essentially making my manual labor the primary financial engine behind her lover's corporate hospitality. She had even shifted the title of her business assets under a shell corporation, a clumsy attempt to protect her high-end styling revenue in the event that our marriage ever dissolved on her terms. My accountant friend just shook his head, his fingers tapping the glowing spreadsheet on the monitor as he looked up at me with a mixture of professional fascination and profound sympathy. He told me that from a legal standpoint, she was hand-delivering her own ruin. All we had to do was let her keep digging the hole until she couldn't see the light of day. Instead of freezing the accounts or revoking her access, which would have triggered an immediate alarm and sent her running to Vaughn's high-priced legal team, I chose to lean into her greed. I intentionally transferred an extra allocation of my accrued overtime bonuses into our joint checking account, making a big show of leaving the deposit slip on the refrigerator door with a sticky note that read, "For your summer boutique expansion, so you don't have to stress about the overhead." I watched through the hidden security application on my tablet as she discovered that note the next afternoon, her lips curling into a tiny mocking smirk of pure satisfaction, before she immediately initiated a wire transfer to lock in a premium lease on a downtown commercial property owned by one of Vaughn's holding companies. She thought she was executing the perfect heist, completely unaware that every dollar she moved was being legally documented as a fraudulent dissipation of marital assets. The next phase of the blueprint required a quiet, systematic insulation of my own future, ensuring that the house I built with my bare hands would never be touched by her upcoming collapse. Under the expert guidance of my attorney, I initiated a comprehensive restructuring of our property deed, capitalizing on an old homestead clause in our state law that protected properties from corporate litigation if the primary breadwinner could prove the underlying debt was acquired through independent fraudulent misrepresentation. I quietly moved my municipal retirement pension and the inheritance my grandfather had left me into a protected family trust locked behind a legal firewall that no standard divorce court could penetrate. I did all of this during the early afternoon hours, moving through bank lobbies and notary offices, with the quiet efficiency of a ghost, before putting on my grease-stained uniform and driving to the water treatment plant to pull my regular 12-hour shift. At the plant, the guys started noticing a change in my demeanor, though they couldn't quite put their fingers on what had shifted behind my eyes. Sylvan came by the operator's booth one rainy Tuesday midnight, ostensibly to drop off some upgraded filtration gaskets from his shop, but his eyes kept darting around the desk trying to read my expression. He stood there for a few minutes, shifting his weight from foot to foot, his voice dropping into that awkward low register people use when they are carrying a heavy burden of guilt. He asked me if everything was all right at home, mentioning that he had noticed a lot of unfamiliar construction vehicles driving through our neighborhood during the day while I was sleeping. I looked him dead in the eye, my face a completely blank mask of blue-collar exhaustion, and told him that Kira was just getting some estimates for a new patio layout from some of the country club developers. The relief that washed over his face was almost comical. He patted my shoulder, told me I was a good man who worked too hard, and practically sprinted back to his truck, eager to report back to the rest of the town that the Night Watchman was still completely in the dark. Their relief was exactly what I needed to set the final trap, ensuring that the community's collective silence would become the very mechanism that sealed their own embarrassment. By the middle of April, Kira's confidence had reached a point of absolute recklessness. She was no longer even bothering to hide the sandalwood scent on her clothes, and her burner phone was frequently left humming on the laundry machine while she took calls on her corporate line in the next room. She informed me with that practiced tone of professional importance that the Regional Development Board was preparing to announce Vaughn's multi-million-dollar municipal library expansion project, and that she had been selected to coordinate the exclusive VIP celebration dinner at our local country club. She looked at me across the kitchen island, her eyes completely vacant, as she suggested it might be best if I stayed home that evening, claiming the event was strictly reserved for high-profile investors and corporate stakeholders who wouldn't understand my line of work. I leaned back against the counter, crossed my arms to hide the sudden tightening of my jaw, and let out a soft, submissive sigh that perfectly matched the defeated husband persona I had been cultivating for months. I told her that I completely understood that my presence would only complicate her networking. But then I dropped the bait, a casual throwaway suggestion that I could help her secure a private off-the-books catering discount through an old high school connection who managed the premium logistics for the county's largest food distribution network. I told her it would save her styling firm thousands of dollars in presentation costs, allowing her to look like a financial genius in front of Vaughn and the development board. Her eyes widened slightly, a flash of pure opportunism crossing her face before she smoothly patted my arm and told me she appreciated me finally thinking about her career progression. The following morning, I bypassed the local country club administration entirely and made a direct personal visit to a quiet, elegant estate on the western edge of the county, the home of Nola Vaughn's wife, who also happened to be the head of the Regional Library's Endowment Board. I didn't show up with wild accusations or emotional outbursts. I arrived in a clean button-down shirt carrying a neatly bound professional portfolio containing the complete forensic audit of our joint accounts, the encrypted text logs from the silver burner phone, and the explicit financial records showing exactly how her husband had been using county development funds to bankroll Kira's business ventures. Nola sat in her sunroom, her face turning from polite confusion to a pale porcelain mask of absolute fury as she turned the pages, her fingers gripping the edge of the leather folder until her knuckles went entirely white. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just looked up at me with the cold, calculating eyes of a woman who came from old family money and realized her family's public legacy was being systematically degraded by a cheap suburban affair. We sat in that quiet room for nearly an hour, the soft ticking of a grandfather clock, the only sound against the glass, as we coordinated the logistical details of the upcoming VIP dinner with the icy precision of two chess players placing the final pieces on a board. When I left her estate and walked out to my truck, the afternoon air felt crisp and remarkably clear, the heavy gray clouds finally breaking to reveal a sharp, brilliant blue sky over the valley. I drove back toward our suburban neighborhood, pulling into the driveway just as the automatic lawn sprinklers hissed to life, casting a fine mist over the manicured grass that Kira took so much pride in showing off to her friends. I walked up the porch steps, unlocked the front door, and found her standing in the center of our living room, surrounded by fabric samples, seating charts, and color palettes for the upcoming gala. Her phone pressed to her ear as she laughed softly at something Vaughn was saying to her on the other end of the line. Was small. She didn't even break her stride when the front door handle rattled, merely turning her back to me to offer a hushed, intimate giggle into the receiver before sliding the device into her silk pocket with a practiced flick of her wrist. The sheer, unadulterated confidence radiating from her every movement was almost fascinating. To watch a masterclass in how a person can entirely erase their own conscience when they believe they are holding all the cards. But as I stood there in the center of that expensive living room, looking at the meticulous seating arrangements pinned to her foam presentation boards, I knew the room layout she was staring at was completely different from the one that was about to unfold. Before we get into the absolute slow-motion demolition of that evening at the country club, I need you to do something for me right now. Drop a comment down below and tell me honestly, if an entire community made you the punchline of a multi-year joke behind your back, would you just pack your bags and walk away, or would you pull up a chair and make every single one of them watch the curtain fall? Let me know your thoughts, and if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button, because the final chapter of this ride is something you need to see through to the very last second. The night of the Municipal Library Gala arrived with a crisp, low-hanging fog that rolled off the hills, wrapping the brick facade of the Valley Country Club in a heavy, ghostly mist. The parking lot was a sea of polished luxury vehicles, their headlights cutting through the damp air, as the town's prominent figures, municipal board members, and self-proclaimed elite drifted toward the warm, amber glow of the main ballroom. Kira had left our house 3 hours earlier in a stunning, backless emerald gown, her perfume lingering in our empty hallway like a fading warning sign. I took my time getting ready carefully, smoothing down the collar of a clean, dark suit I hadn't worn since a family funeral years ago, checking my reflection in the mirror one last time. There was no anger left in my face, no traces of the exhausted, beaten-down shift worker who had swallowed their whispers for years. There was only a calm, unshakable focus. When I stepped into the foyer of the ballroom, the rich scent of catered prime rib expensive champagne and wood smoke hit my senses, instantly accompanied by that familiar sudden drop in the room's volume. I watched the immediate subtle shifts in posture as several neighborhood couples noticed me standing near the coat, checked the way Sylvan's jaw dropped slightly over his cocktail glass, and the frantic hushed whispers that began rippling through the local development board table. Kira was across the room, standing beneath a massive crystal chandelier next to Vaughn, who looked exceptionally sharp in a tailored tuxedo, gesturing grandly toward a digital rendering of his new architectural project. The moment Kira's eyes drifted toward the entrance and locked onto my silhouette, the professional, radiant smile frozen on her face cracked right down the center, her cheeks draining of color so fast it looked like she had seen a ghost. She immediately excused herself from the investors, navigating the crowded floor with a hurried, aggressive elegance until she intercepted me near the champagne fountain, her fingers digging into the fabric of my sleeve with a desperate iron grip. In a frantic, venomous whisper, she asked me what the hell I was doing there, demanding to know why I wasn't at the industrial plant pulling my regular weekend turnaround shift. I didn't pull away from her touch. Instead, I simply looked down at her emerald dress, offered a warm, incredibly gentle smile, and told her in a clear conversational voice that I couldn't miss the biggest presentation of her career. Before she could utter another syllable to push me out the door, the heavy double doors at the back of the room opened, and Nola walked into the ballroom surrounded by 3 uniformed county sheriffs and the municipal district attorney carrying a stack of notarized legal folders under her arm. The transition from a celebration to an execution happened so quietly that half the room didn't even realize the trap had sprung until the microphone at the main podium clicked to life, sending a sharp, echoing hum through the speakers. Nola didn't look at her husband, nor did she acknowledge the room's confused murmurs as she took the stage, her face an unreadable porcelain mask of old money authority. She announced into the microphone that due to a sudden comprehensive internal audit regarding the allocation of public infrastructure funds and private corporate credits, the municipal library project was being permanently suspended, effective immediately. A suffocating dead silence fell over the ballroom, the kind of silence that makes you hear the ice melting in the glasses as Nola calmly opened the first folder and began reading directly from the forensic accounting statements I had delivered to her sunroom. She didn't just expose a financial discrepancy. She laid out the complete line-by-line breakdown of how Vaughn had been utilizing the development board's tax-sheltered hospitality accounts to fund private luxury travel and independent consultancy fees for Kira's styling firm. The screen behind the podium, which was supposed to display the beautiful architectural blueprints of the new library, suddenly flashed to life with massive high-resolution scans of bank wire transfers, joint asset liquidations, and explicit text message logs detailing their multi-year arrangement. The names, dates, and dollar amounts were displayed in cold, clinical black and white for every single neighbor, client, and coworker in that room to see, stripping away the illusion of their high society success in a matter of seconds. The psychological collapse on the floor was spectacular in its slowness. Vaughn didn't even attempt to defend Kira. The moment he realized the district attorney was standing 10 feet away, his smooth, arrogant demeanor completely shattered into a panicked, sweating mess of self-preservation. He turned to his wife and the board members, his voice cracking into the microphone as he loudly claimed that he had been entirely manipulated by an aggressive independent contractor who had falsified her firm's financial credentials. He threw Kira under the legal bus without a single shred of hesitation, describing her as nothing more than a temporary transactional mistake, desperate to distance his family assets from her upcoming liability. Kira stood frozen in the center of the ballroom, her hands shaking so violently that her wine glass slipped from her fingers. shattering against the polished hardwood floor with a sharp, echoing crash that mirrored the total destruction of her social identity. She looked around the room for support, her eyes pleading with the neighborhood wives she had spent years trying to impress. But the very community that had protected her secret for seasons turned their backs on her with a cold, terrifying unanimity. The neighbor women actively looked away, adjusting their jewelry or staring at their shoes, completely erasing her from their circle to protect their own families from the fallout of the public scandal. Sylvan and the other men who had enjoyed Vaughn's patronizing favors suddenly looked terrified, realizing that the quiet night watchman they had laughed at for years was the one who had held the match to their entire local network. Kira turned her gaze toward me, her mouth opening and closing as she tried to find the words to manipulate the situation, her eyes filled with a desperate, suffocating realization that her entire life had been completely hollowed out from the inside while she was busy feeling superior. I didn't say a single word to her, nor did I offer a look of anger or triumphant satisfaction. I simply reached into the inside pocket of my suit jacket, pulled out the finalized legally binding divorce papers that had been insulated by the state's fraudulent misrepresentation clauses, and laid them gently on the table next to her ruined presentation boards. The documents clearly stated that she was leaving our marriage with absolutely zero equity in the suburban house, her frozen business assets completely tied up in the upcoming municipal fraud investigation, and her personal accounts drained by her own wire transfers. I turned on my heel and walked out of the country club ballroom, the heavy oak doors closing behind me, cutting off the sudden chaotic explosion of whispers and arguments that erupted in the space I had just vacated. The morning sun was just starting to break through the gray valley fog when I loaded the last of my personal toolboxes into the back of my truck. The quiet suburban street looking remarkably peaceful in the early daylight. There were no flashing lights, no screaming matches on the front lawn, just the steady rhythmic hiss of the automatic lawn sprinklers clearing the morning dew from the grass. I climbed into the cab, turned the key, and listened to the familiar deep rumble of the engine as it warmed up in the cool air, a profound sense of lightness settling into my chest for the first time in 12 long years. As I pulled out of the driveway and caught a glimpse of the empty custom-built house in my rearview mirror, I knew the structure would eventually be sold to pay off her legal debts, but the ground beneath it was finally clean. I shifted the truck into drive, stepped on the gas, and watched the small town fade into a tiny, insignificant speck behind me as I headed toward the state line, completely ready to build an entirely new life on a foundation that nobody could ever take away from me again.